Welcome to the part 6 of our React course series, guys. In this part, we'll be styling our React application that we created in part 5, and we'll be learning about the various techniques like styling through SCSS, through CSS and JS modules, like style components and CSS module. So let's look at our very first way of styling the components. It's called as inline styling. It's very much aligned with the inline CSS that we write in our HTML. So just by having the CSS, the style attribute, you can pass any styling attributes that you want, but they have to be as a JavaScript object, which means you can't use kebab case. You have to use the camel case. For example, if you want to do border color, you have to write border and capital C color as something. So this is not encouraged. This practice is not encouraged at all. But even if you are using this, the best practice is to take this out into variable outside the component so that it is out of this function block, because this function block will get executed every time on every render. So you want to avoid changing the reference of some property that you're passing to some component, which might trigger a re-render in response to just this object getting changed. So you don't want to do that to avoid unnecessary re-render. So you can do something like this. So yep, that's how we have been using it already, and this is how it looks. Simple. It's a very simple process, and you should use it sparingly. The next type of styling that we'll look at is a little more better than this, and that is called as the CSS, normal CSS that you write, style sheet. For example, we have this user item component, which is a part of our list. So I've styled this using the CSS like this. So here I have this I've moved first of all the user item component into its folder where index.jsx is representing the entry point, so that our imports, for example, don't need to change. And inside our index.csx, I'm calling this import, which is user item.css, and let's see what's inside user item.css. It's our very plain basic CSS that we just write, and after just importing this, and I've introduced class names, by the way, here for each tag, for each element, and here you can see that all the styles belonging to those class names are getting respected, right? So for example, p.username has the style because I defined it here like this. So this is good. This is better than our previous approach, but still there's one problem, and that is the styles are getting leaked. For example, I have the intention of, creating this particular file, user item.css, and I'm importing this file inside the JSX for that component. But the thing is, this holder class will be available outside this user item component as well, which means if I want to use this holder class here, for example, it'll respect it. So if I go here to my user detail component now, this holder class has been applied to it. Now why this is happening is because we have to understand how the styling works in React apps. So basically what it does is, as you can tell, as soon as we import any CSS file into our component, it makes to the global style tag here, and all the styles are copied. Now this means that this holder class name is accessible to our whole DOM tree, right? So anywhere in my application, if I use class name holder, I could unintentionally copy the styles from one particular component style. So that could be a boon as well as a curse. So for example, the way it is beneficial is you actually want to use a holder class that is available application wide, right? So for example, consider this thing that you want to create a button of your application. Let's say a primary button is what you want to create, and you want to create it only once so that you don't have to import it and write every time you create a new component. So that's when it is really helpful. For example, I can take this holder class and take it out into my global CSS here, index.css, and put it here. So in that way it is beneficial, but most of the time you'll find yourself in a place because we are creating components, and we want these components to have scoped styles, right? We don't want our style, we don't want our class username to leak out into another component as well. And unintentionally, this can result in CSS errors. So the next way that we are going to talk about is called as CSS modules, which will overcome this problem. So in order to do CSS modules, all you have to do is just simply change the extension of the file to .module.css. Now this is required only if you have bootstrap your project using Create React app. If you're using your own setup using Webpack, you can make this configuration change in your Webpack as setting the module argument to true inside the CSS loader. But we won't go there. Let's stick to what Create React app provides. In case of React, you'll have to change this to module.css. Now let's see what change has been made. User item.module.css. Now let's see what happens. All our styles are gone now. Why? Because as you can tell from this style tag, these classes have been suffixed with hash. As you can see, for example, a holder class has been prefixed with the component name, and it has been suffixed with some very specific hash. So this marks that obviously, first of all, we can't use directly the class names. For example, the class name that I had here, because ultimately it's just HTML and CSS, right? So my holder class doesn't even exist, and that's why there are no styles pertaining to that holder class. Now that'll be a problem because this is a dynamically generated class names and we can't get a hold of them. So the only way to do that is by grabbing a reference of this CSS export inside a JS object, and that JS object will expose these property that we just defined in the form of classes. So for example, now I'll have to use something like this, styles.holder or styles.username. And now it's a problem because as you can see, JavaScript doesn't accept these hyphenated property names, so you'll have to use it like this. And in case you want to use multiple properties, you'll have to do multiple styles, so you'll have to provide a space separated styles like this. Because all this is doing is just returning a reference, just returning the string that belongs to, that is mapped to this particular dynamically generated name of the CSS class that we just wrote. So that's one nicer way of scoping our styles. As you can see, now the styles have been scoped. So for example, now if I go to my detail component, the holder style hasn't been applied because the only way to apply the holder style is I'll have to import explicitly in that module, in that component, from user item module.css, which is present inside the user item folder. So we know that there's no chance of leaking the styles unless we explicitly import it from that particular file. Just like we do JavaScript modules, we have the CSS modules like this. So now it will get applied, right? Okay, so that was about CSS modules. Now, if you don't prefer writing your styles in a CSS file and you prefer something like a Sass or less, so Create React app provides a way for that. It's very simple. All you have to do is install this one dependency called as Node Sass, and let's install that. And while this is installing, all we have to do is convert the extension first of all from CSS to SCSS and change the imports as well like this. By the way, we don't need the styles, and that's it. And there's an error, so okay, we haven't saved it. I'll just save it, and Node.js has been installed, and now we can enjoy the liberty of writing SCSS. For example, I don't have to write the span like this anymore. I can make it as a part of this thing, and same way you can use the Sass variables thing, imports, exports, Or is that? So now if we see, it's still compiling. Okay, we'll just have to reload it and it's still behaving the same way. So that was the use of SCSS inside a Create React app. Now let's move to the very popular format of styling your React components, and that is called as CSS in JS pattern. And that is really popular, and that is really the go-to way of styling your components. And one of the very popular libraries of that pattern is called as style components, and there are others as well, like emotion and glamour. But in this course we'll discuss about the style components, because this has been there for quite a lot of time, and it's really popular. Style components, and let's install this. So let's understand how this works first. So instead of writing CSS, now you don't need to write CSS. Now what I mean by that is you don't have to write the CSS files. You can style the components right inside your JS files. You don't have to go outside, but in a way that you will be actually writing CSS inside these backticks. So we'll see in a moment how that works. So for example, now here all of my CSS has to be, now this can be my JavaScript file, and now this is a bad JavaScript syntax, but all we have to do is import styled from styled components. The benefit of having it as a JavaScript file is that we can now perform the logical operations, that we can apply if-else on the styles based on certain conditions. We'll see in a moment. So for example, now everything is every class name, every style piece that we had written here now behaves like a component in itself. So for example, I want to create the approach is a little different, so it will be a little difficult in the first, it will look a little weird in the first glance if you're using it for the first time, but it looks like this. So for example, instead of using div class name holder, how about if I go like this? Instead of creating a class name as holder, I'll actually create a holder component, and that is possible through this. So the way it works is style dot, you have to provide the HTML tag name, and you have to provide the backticks. Now inside the backticks, it's called as the tag template literal syntax in ECMAScript 6. So all the CSS that you once wrote inside your class, you can write it here, and you have to do it for all of the classes that you wrote. Now I've changed all of my classes, I've wrapped all of them inside the style utility, and there are a few things that I like to discuss now. For example, we want to style this link, and this is not an HTML element. So what we have to do is, instead of importing a link here directly, we'll have to import it in this file, and the user avatar link instead of this. Now we can't do dot link because this is not an HTML element. So rather the syntax is to use this constructor pattern and provide this link as an argument, and then it will behave the same way. And you have to export all of these style components, and if you go back, instead of importing from, you'll have to import all of these members from the styles.js file now, so you don't have to provide the extension, and change all of your tags like this, user avatar link. So you can see now we have removed all our class names, all the mess, and it looks super pretty right now, super clean. And let's see how our output looks right now. It still looks the same, right? So the benefit of using style components is, first of all, the scope styles that it provides, and it's just a part of the component, which means now you can take this component, user item component out, and without worrying, either place it in a separate project or in the same project in a separate directory. You don't have to ever worry about the styles getting leaked. And because it introduces, there are several benefits of using it. For example, you can do theming, you can do conditional styling based on the props. For example, let's say I want to have a variant of super title let's say, and subtitle, something like this. And inside the username, you can username component, style component, you can have something like on the font size if you want to apply. Now this is a tag template literal, which means just the way you do apply dynamic variables inside the backticks, inside the template literal in ES6, you can perform a ternary operator here. So for example, props. Now this is, please mind that this is a component now. So which means props.variant would be available as a prop on it. If prop.variant is equals to super title, right? That was it. Yeah. Will return with the 20 pixels. Otherwise, we'll use the 16 pixels. Now you can take this logic to any extent. You can apply a switch case. You can extract it out into a separate component, something like function username variant resolver, and you'll get a variant as a parameter, and inside you can apply a switch case. You can apply a case for the subtitle, maybe 18, and by default return 16 pixels. These have to be strings. And now instead of, we can destructure it and pass this function username variant resolver variant. So you can see the power of using style components. Now we are strictly very easily using the JavaScript logic inside our styling process, and it's really helpful. So now if we go back and see, our application behaves the same way. So we provided a variant of super title. It's now, we are getting 20 pixels. Now if we provide, let's say, subtitle, it should give us our 18 pixels here. So yeah, it's 18 pixel, and if I don't provide anything, it will default to 16 pixels. So same way you can do with something like the very primary use cases with buttons, which you can tell from normal button and primary button. So you create the style for a button, and here as a background property you can apply props.primary, provide this primary color, otherwise default back to the white color. So same way, there are plenty of other things that you can do. For example, you created a button like this. You created a, just the way you extend styles in SCSS, same way you can create a style component once and extend it. For example, you created a button and you want to create a tomato colored button. So you can do something, the case we saw with, the link tag that we had. So simply you can extend it very easily. So these are the benefits of using style components over the normal way we go about creating styles. So this has been really revolutionary. Earlier it was really a pain of introducing styles inside the JS. Now you're writing styles in the JS, so all those problems have been eliminated. You can apply the pseudo classes as we have seen. So if you are using SCSS already, you'll feel at home. All the SCSS syntax are still valid here. For example, this is how you write the pseudo classes inside SCSS. So same way inside the style components as well, it permits this syntax. Thanks for watching, guys. In the next section, we'll implement the light to dark mode feature using theming in our style components. So it'll be really interesting. Stay tuned.